Welcome to the Archivist Files. Some deaths are so bizarre, they sound like scenes from a dark comedy rather than real life. These tragic yet unbelievable incidents remind us how unpredictable fate can be, turning ordinary moments into shocking final acts. From laughter to everyday mishaps, these stories reveal the strangest and most unexpected ways people have met their end. It was a calm afternoon in a small town in Belarus. Friends and family had gathered to celebrate Yulia's 21st birthday. The house was filled with laughter, the smell of food, and the sound of her little daughter's voice calling out every now and then. Everything looked peaceful, like any family gathering on a happy day. Outside, Yulia's car was parked in the driveway, doors open as she moved things from inside. Her daughter, just 2 years old, was sitting in the back seat, playing with buttons and switches like children often do. Yulia was nearby, smiling at her child's curiosity. She leaned toward the car window to help her daughter out. It was a small moment, one of those everyday things parents do without thinking twice. Then, something no one could have imagined happened. The child's hand accidentally pressed the power window button. The glass began to rise slowly. Yulia's neck was caught between the window frame and the top of the glass. The pressure stopped her breathing within seconds. Her daughter didn't understand what was going on. A few minutes passed before Yulia's husband came outside. He saw her motionless, leaning awkwardly against the car. Realizing what had happened, he broke the window and pulled her out. She was unconscious but still had a pulse. An ambulance arrived quickly and took her to the hospital. Doctors worked to save her, but she had suffered severe brain damage due to lack of oxygen. She remained in a coma for 8 days. Her family stayed with her, hoping she would wake up. Despite all efforts, Yulia passed away. The news spread through the town, leaving everyone shocked. How could something so small, a button, a window, take a life so young? Her husband and relatives struggled to believe it. They kept saying she had only been trying to help her child, that it had all happened in seconds. There was no crash, no warning, no noise, just a sudden stillness that changed everything. The authorities confirmed that it was a tragic accident. The power window system in modern cars is strong enough to trap someone if it doesn't have an automatic safety feature. Some newer models now include sensors that stop the window if something blocks it, but not all cars have that technology. But Yulia wasn't the only one whose life ended because of something as harmless as a car window. Just 3 years later, another tragedy struck, this time involving a curious child and a moment that changed everything. It was a quiet day in Lincolnshire, England, in 2012. 5-year-old Michael DURY was at home with his mother. The morning had passed peacefully. He had breakfast, played with his toys, and followed his mother around the house as young children often do. Outside, her Ford Escort was parked in the driveway after a short trip to the shops. The car engine was off, but like many vehicles, its electric systems still worked for a while. The windows could be moved with a press of a button even without the key in the ignition. At some point in the afternoon, while his mother was busy inside, Michael wandered outdoors. It was something he often did, moving between the house and garden. The driveway was only a few steps away. The car door was unlocked. Curious as always, he opened it and climbed inside. From the driver's seat, everything must have seemed fascinating. The steering wheel, the dashboard, and the buttons all looked like a small world of their own. He had seen adults press switches and turn dials many times. To him, it was only a game. He leaned against the door, perhaps trying to look outside or pretending to drive. Then, as his hand brushed the power window control, the glass began to rise. It was a quiet movement, almost soundless. Before he realized what was happening, the window pressed firmly against his neck. The pressure increased as the motor kept running. The Ford Escort he was in did not have a safety sensor to stop the window when it met an obstruction. The glass continued to close until it could go no farther. In those few seconds, Michael lost his ability to breathe. Inside the house, his mother called his name, expecting him to answer from the garden. When she didn't hear a reply, she stepped outside to look for him. Everything seemed still, the yard, the car, the afternoon air. Then she saw him through the window. She rushed to the car, opened the door, and pulled him out. He wasn't responding. She shouted for help, and neighbors came running. They called emergency services, but there was nothing more anyone could do by the time help arrived. The accident had taken only moments, so brief that no one nearby even heard a sound. The car stood exactly as it had before, parked and silent, yet what had happened inside changed everything. When investigators later examined the vehicle, they found that the window system worked normally. It rose and stopped only when fully closed. There was no built-in feature to detect if something blocked its path. That absence had turned a harmless piece of machinery into a deadly trap. Michael's story remains one of those rare but deeply painful reminders of how quickly a simple act of curiosity can end in tragedy. A child climbed into a car, pressed a button, and within seconds, a quiet afternoon became one that no family ever forgets. If you're following these unbelievable accidents closely, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss another story this chilling. It was a quiet Sunday afternoon at the Anliang department store in Jingzhou. Shoppers drifted between clothing racks, the sound of soft music echoing off marble floors. Among them was a young mother, Shang Liujuan, holding her little boy's hand. They had just finished browsing and were heading toward the upper floor, smiling and chatting lightly, the way mothers and sons do when the world feels safe. The escalator hummed steadily beneath their feet, carrying them upward. Bright lights shimmered across the polished metal steps. Her son stood just ahead of her, fascinated by the moving handrails. It was an ordinary moment, the kind of small routine scene that passes unnoticed in the rhythm of daily life. As they neared the top, nothing seemed unusual. But just as they reached the landing, the surface beneath them shifted. In a heartbeat, the metal panel at the exit gave way with a clanging snap. What had looked like solid flooring suddenly gaped open, revealing a dark, grinding pit of gears and belts churning beneath. Xiang's foot slipped through the opening. She stumbled forward, instinctively shoving her child ahead toward safety. The boy fell into the arms of nearby store staff, startled but unhurt. Behind him, the scene turned nightmarish. The machinery, hidden moments ago beneath the smooth floor, seized her leg and dragged her downward. Her body was pulled toward the moving mechanism. Shoppers screamed. Employees rushed forward. The escalator kept running, steps vanishing into the void where she was trapped. Metal shrieked against metal. Several people tried to pull her out, gripping her arms desperately, but the force beneath was relentless. For a few seconds, she remained half above the surface, calling out, pushing her son further away. Then the motion below twisted again, and she was drawn in completely. The escalator shuddered, groaned, and then stopped, silent except for the cries of those who had witnessed it. The entire event lasted less than a minute. A simple ride to another floor had turned into a tragedy almost too sudden to comprehend. The sound of the collapsing panel, the collective gasp of onlookers, the chaos that followed, it all happened with terrible speed. When maintenance workers had inspected that escalator earlier that morning, they had removed the top cover plate to reach the internal parts. The piece had been set back into place but not locked down correctly. To anyone approaching later, the landing looked perfectly normal. Shiny, secure, trustworthy. It wasn't. The mechanical design underneath was powerful enough to move tons of weight continuously, minute after minute. Once exposed, it became a trap with no forgiveness for human error. Witnesses would later describe the unbearable helplessness of watching something go so wrong, so fast. Some shouted for emergency stops, others ran for tools. But in that narrow space, with the moving gears concealed below, there was nothing anyone could do in time. In the midst of the confusion, her small son stood frozen nearby, still reaching out, unaware of the full horror of what had just happened. The escalator stood still now, a symbol of betrayal, a machine meant for convenience that had turned lethal in a fraction of a second. It was an ordinary evening in King's Lynn, Norfolk. The television flickered in the corner of the living room, filling the space with the warm glow of 1970s British comedy. Alex Mitchell, a 50-year-old bricklayer, settled comfortably into his armchair after a long day's work. His wife joined him, a cup of tea in hand, as the familiar theme of The Goodies began to play. The show that night featured a particularly absurd scene, one of those over-the-top sketches that made British humor both bizarre and brilliant. On screen, the comedians were tangled in chaos, bagpipes blaring, slapstick antics colliding, and a kilted man flailing in perfect comic timing. At first, Alex chuckled softly, the kind of laugh that starts in the chest, genuine but restrained. But then, as the scene grew more ridiculous, a chase, a tumble, the screech of bagpipes echoing through the speakers, his laughter deepened. He leaned back, shoulders shaking. His wife smiled. Alex had always loved this kind of humor, but tonight, something was different. His laughter didn't fade. It rolled on, unstoppable, wave after wave, louder and longer each time. Within minutes, he was gasping for air, tears streaming down his face. The kind of laughter that hurts, that makes you clutch your ribs, that you can't control even when you try. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. He kept laughing, unable to stop. His body rocked in the chair, chest heaving, face red. His wife's amusement turned to concern. She told him to calm down, to take a breath, but her words were lost beneath the roar of his laughter. 20 minutes in, the sound had changed. Still laughter, but broken by coughing, his breath hitching between each fit. He tried to speak, to wave his hand as if to say he was fine, but no words came. His heart was pounding too fast. The rhythm inside his chest no longer matched the rhythm of his laughter. And still, he laughed. Then, suddenly, silence. He leaned forward slightly, the smile still frozen on his face, and then collapsed. The television kept playing, the laugh track echoing through the room as his wife rushed to his side. But Alex was gone. Just like that. From laughter to stillness in seconds. Doctors later said his heart had given out. He'd suffered a fatal attack, triggered by the long, uncontrollable fits of laughter. A strange, almost unbelievable way to go, laughing himself to death. The very idea seemed like something out of a dark comedy sketch itself. A man overtaken by joy, undone by amusement. Yet for Alex, that laughter had been real, full, genuine, unstoppable. It was as though the comedy that had delighted him for years had claimed him in its final punchline. Neighbors later recalled how often his laughter filled the house when The Goodies came on. He was known for it, the loud, contagious laugh that made others join in even when they didn't know what was funny. That night, though, the sound lasted too long, stretched beyond what the human body could take. His chair remained empty, the television still glowing, the closing credits rolling over the same smile that had just moments before been alive with joy. If you're following these unbelievable accidents closely, don't forget to like and subscribe so you never miss another story this chilling. It was a humid Florida night in October 2012. The crowd at Ben Siegel Reptile Store buzzed with excitement, the kind of energy that builds before something outrageous happens. A local event, a Midnight Madness challenge, had drawn thrill seekers from around Deerfield Beach. The prize? A live python. The task? Eat more giant insects than anyone else. Among the contestants stood Edward Archbold, 32 years old, tall, lean, with a grin that showed both nerves and confidence. He wasn't a stranger to wild dares. His friends knew him as the guy who'd try anything once. The stage lights gleamed off glass tanks filled with writhing cockroaches, crickets, and worms. The air smelled faintly of soil and adrenaline. A host raised the microphone. "Who's ready?" The crowd cheered. Lids were opened, containers placed on the table. In front of each participant, dozens of palm-sized roaches, glossy and twitching. Cameras clicked. The competition began. Edward leaned in, grabbed a handful, and started eating. The crunch was loud, wet, awful, echoing through the room. He chewed quickly, swallowing hard, determined to win. Spectators shouted his name, laughing and clapping. Other contestants hesitated, but Edward kept going, driven by the rush, maybe the absurdity of it all. One after another, he devoured them. The insect's legs stuck to his lips, shells cracked between his teeth. Each swallow drew gasps and nervous laughter from the crowd. He raised his arms in triumph, face shining with sweat. Minutes passed. The contest neared its end. Edward had eaten dozens, maybe hundreds, of cockroaches and worms. His movements slowed. He rubbed his throat, trying to clear it. A cough broke through his grin, then another. Someone shouted, "You okay, man?" He waved them off at first, still coughing, bending slightly as if catching his breath. Then his knees buckled. He stumbled away from the table, hands on his chest. The cheers faded into murmurs, then silence. His breathing turned ragged, each gasp sharper than the last. He leaned against the wall, trying to swallow, but his throat convulsed. One of the insects, or perhaps fragments of shell, had caught deep inside. Panic rippled through the crowd. Someone called for help. Within moments, he collapsed to the floor. Contestants rushed toward him, shouting his name. The store's fluorescent lights flickered above the scene, illuminating the half-empty containers, the scattered bugs crawling across the table. A moment ago, the air had been filled with laughter and challenge. Now it was thick with confusion and fear. A staff member began chest compressions, someone else dialing emergency services. The crowd backed away, stunned. On the ground, Edward lay still, his face pale beneath the harsh white light. The cheers that had filled the room minutes before were replaced by quiet disbelief. Paramedics arrived within minutes, pushing through the stunned onlookers. The insects were still moving, a grotesque reminder of what had just unfolded. They lifted him onto a stretcher, the sound of latex gloves snapping echoing against the tanks of snakes and reptiles. The competition was over. The prize, the python, sat in its enclosure, coiled, indifferent. It had started as a wild, harmless stunt, a bit of shock entertainment for a late-night crowd. But somewhere between laughter and applause, it turned lethal. The excitement, the cheers, the bright lights, all of it now haunted by one man's fatal determination to win. It was supposed to be an ordinary day for Keith McAllister. A routine visit to a medical center in Westbury, Long Island, nothing more than accompanying his wife for her knee scan. The couple had been there before, familiar faces to the staff, and the visit felt as harmless as any other. But within minutes, a calm morning turned into one of the most shocking and tragic accidents in modern medical history. Keith, 61, stood near the MRI suite as his wife prepared for the procedure. The large machine sat quietly behind the door, humming faintly, powerful yet still. To the untrained eye, it looked harmless, a piece of advanced technology designed to heal and diagnose. But beneath that quiet presence was an invisible force, a magnetic field so intense it could lift a car, pull metal across a room, or in this case, take a man's life in an instant. Moments later, Keith stepped closer to the room, still wearing a heavy metal chain around his neck, something he had worn countless times before. He had even entered that same facility earlier with it on, without incident. But this time, fate had a different plan. As he crossed into the restricted zone, the chain reacted instantly to the MRI's magnetic pull. In a split second, the 20-pound piece of metal turned into a deadly weapon. Witnesses recall hearing a sudden crash, a metallic thud followed by a scream. The enormous magnet had locked onto the chain with unstoppable force, dragging Keith forward violently. The impact was so strong that he was pinned against the machine, unable to move, trapped by the very device meant for healing. The powerful field wouldn't let go. No human strength could pull him free. Panic filled the room. Technicians rushed to cut the power. But unlike most machines, an MRI magnet doesn't simply turn off. The magnetic field is constant, always active, even when the system isn't scanning. Time passed in chaos and disbelief as medical staff tried desperately to rescue him. Reports later revealed that he remained stuck for nearly an hour before emergency responders could safely separate him from the magnet. By then, the damage was done. Keith suffered multiple heart attacks and was rushed to the hospital, but he could not be revived. His wife, who had come for a simple medical test, left without her husband. The shock rippled far beyond that small room. Don't forget to subscribe and click the bell icon. You won't want to miss the shocking stories we have coming next.